Cardinal Basil Hume was a very special person, and he was a close friend of my family. I was at his ordination in July 1950, which was the end of my first year at Ampleforth.
When we went to the senior school at Ampleforth, the headmaster decided which house we were to go to, but we were given preferences. Mine was St Bede's, as it was a sporty house, my parents the same because of the reputation of Father Basil, and even an intensive teenager like me recognised that he was very special.
Father Basil taught me O-level French when I was a boy. In our set there was one Michael Fogarty, who was always playing pranks. On this occasion he drilled a hole through the centre of a piece of chalk and inserted a match covered with a layer of chalk dust. When Father Basil picked up the piece of chalk, there was a sharp intake of breath from the class. He could tell something was up, but he didn't know what, though he had a good idea that Fogarty would be the culprit. "Fogarty, what are you doing?" "Nothing, sir." "Be warned," he said, and turned to write on the board. After a few minutes of rising tension, it exploded in his hand. Without turning round, "Fogarty, headmaster."
He was spiritual and prayerful. In his jaws, or house assemblies, he spoke often about prayer, and I wish I'd listened rather more carefully. But I do remember his practical advice, especially before holidays. He said that still when he goes home, his mother tells him to put on his coat before he goes outside. Now you lot, you do the same. But he was also very caring about his pupils, whether they were doing just fine or particularly if they were struggling or in trouble.
Once, when I was a monk, I was in his room and he used the phrase creative tension of the demands of the choir on the one hand and the school on the other. It was only years later, when I was a housemaster in a house that was 10 minutes walk from the Abbey, that I came to understand how the tension between the demands of taking one's place in the choir on the one hand, and the demands of the boys for whom one was responsible on the other, could be creative, because it made me think and consider where my priorities really lay.
An example of his care was a challenge to me when I decided at the age of 15 to join the Royal Navy after school. It was uncomfortable at the time, but in retrospect, I know he had two very good motives. Firstly, to ensure my naval father wasn't pressurising me, and secondly, Father Basil thought I ought to go to university. I told him I'd had absolutely enough of academic study and I wanted to get on with my life. So imagine me having to go and ask him for a reference a year later when the Navy decided to send me up to Oxford. In the final year, the monks elected Father Basil and he left the house. We were surprised because we had our money on him being the next headmaster. He would have been brilliant.
Later still, when he led the Westminster pilgrimage to Lourdes at the same time as our own pilgrimage, he came to visit our ward in the hospital, and he spotted at the other end of the corridor Father Francis Vidal, who had been a fellow novice, the one who'd been acting as guest master when Brother Basil and Brother Martin had posed as prospective parents and been shown round the school by Brother Francis, who wondered why the rest of the community were watching from the windows. All went well until Basil's moustache fell into his teacup. So along the hospital corridors rang the greeting, "Hello, Pongo!"
Father Basil and us maintained contact, and my next important discussion when courting his former head of house younger sister. And I was visiting Ampleforth to play cricket, and I was summoned by the abbot, and he was quizzing me on my intentions. Of course, at 25, I was far too young to get married, but he simply said to me, tapping his nose in the way he did, "If you miss Stephanie, you'll never forgive yourself, and I will not forgive you." When a man you love and respect says that, you get cracking. I proposed 2 months later and was accepted. Father Basil celebrated our nuptial mass in Edinburgh, christened our 4 children as abbot, archbishop and cardinal. He wanted to celebrate our eldest daughter's marriage, but went to a better place beforehand.
My real memory of him was in Lourdes in 1996, when he was with the 40th anniversary of the Handicapped Children's Pilgrimage Trust, HCPT, and he presided at the Mass of 5,000 people. His sermon was a wonderful sermon, consisted only of 5 words, and he got everyone to repeat it. "Jesus loves me very much." It just was quite unforgettable, and it brought the house down. He died 1999, 3 years later, only at the age of 76.
So, from housemaster to part of our extended families. Steph and I still miss Father Basil dreadfully, and after my parents, he was one of the most influential persons in my life. I believe, for all his human frailties, he was the man whose love, compassion, and prayer made him as close to being like Christ as any human could be.
When you join the monastery, you're clothed as a novice, given the habit of the ceremony in choir in front of the whole community, and the abbot gives the talk. And I've always remembered the final words of his talk, which are as applicable today as they were in the novitiate. Keep cheerful, don't grumble, and don't get complicated. God rest him.